Hello everyone, welcome back to the channel. Sisters and brothers, today we explore a topic that has created intense discussion, curiosity, and reflection across many communities. The idea that the God of Black Americans has punished white America through the rise and influence of Donald Trump is a belief voiced by some thinkers and observers. Our goal is not to provoke hostility or deepen division. Instead, we examine the historical context, social tension, spiritual interpretation, and global meaning behind this dramatic claim. We look at it through the lens of moral responsibility, justice, and reflection, themes often highlighted in the sermons of Tony Evans. This exploration aims to increase understanding and promote thoughtful engagement with complex realities that continue to shape the United States and its impact on the world. Throughout history, marginalized communities have often searched for meaning within suffering. They seek to understand injustice not as proof of abandonment, but as an element of a deeper spiritual story. Many Black Americans look at their struggle with the awareness that their ancestors endured centuries of oppression, yet managed to cultivate faith, resilience, and identity. The belief that divine justice eventually corrects injustice is present across many traditions. When large-scale political shifts occur, some interpret them as signs of spiritual consequences for a nation that has often struggled to confront its own past. The rise of Donald Trump shocked both supporters and critics. For some, it represented a demand for national strength. For others, it symbolized a resurgence of racial tension and social division. The idea that his rise could be a form of divine correction speaks to a long historical narrative. In this narrative, nations that ignore injustice eventually face circumstances that force them to look inward. Trump created political energy that intensified debates about race, identity, power, and the meaning of justice. Some believe that this tension nudged the nation toward long-delayed conversations about equality and responsibility. Tony Evans often speaks about divine sovereignty and human accountability. He teaches that God allows nations to face the consequences of their moral choices. He emphasizes that spiritual laws operate beyond political power. According to his teachings, when a society ignores righteousness, it eventually experiences disruption that exposes its deep issues. These disruptions are not always punishment. Sometimes they function as a wake-up call. They reveal what has been hidden under the surface and invite a society to choose a better path. For many Black Americans, the Trump era forced painful issues into national view. Racial inequality, police violence, economic disparity, and cultural exclusion became loud topics. Communities that had long carried these concerns watched the nation finally face them. Some interpret this sudden visibility as divine intervention. They believe that the discomfort experienced across the nation reflects the discomfort endured by Black Americans for generations. In this view, divine justice does not always appear as blessing. Sometimes it appears as exposure. It forces a nation to confront what it once denied. The United States holds significant global influence. When its political environment becomes unstable, the world takes notice. Nations that rely on American leadership observe how domestic conflict affects foreign policy. Allies question whether they can depend on consistent guidance. Regions affected by conflict watch to see whether the United States will maintain involvement. Thus, the rise of any leader with a disruptive style creates ripple effects across continents. This adds another layer to the belief that the Trump era served as a form of spiritual reflection. If a nation with great responsibility loses moral clarity, the consequences stretch far beyond its borders. Political change often reveals deeper cultural truths. Trump did not create division, he exposed it. Many people who supported him believed he represented their frustration with government institutions. Others saw his rise as evidence that racial anxiety still influences American identity. When a nation is forced to confront such realities, it experiences a form of truth-telling. Some view this as a divine process that requires openness, honesty, and humility. Painful truth can lead to meaningful change if people are willing to face it. Tony Evans frequently speaks about alignment with divine purpose. He teaches that personal and national transformation occurs when truth is embraced rather than ignored. In this view, political turmoil can serve as spiritual cleansing. It shakes institutions and reveals weakness. It pushes people to choose between fear and faith. It challenges individuals to examine motives and values. Under this interpretation, the Trump era becomes less about one man and more about a nation forced to face itself. For many Black Americans, spiritual resilience has always been central to survival. Faith provided strength during enslavement, segregation, and discrimination. This faith shaped a world, in which God is active in history. It shaped the belief that divine justice eventually reaches every nation. So when a controversial leader gains power, some interpret it as a sign that God is allowing the nation to experience the consequences of its moral failures. This interpretation does not require hostility toward individuals. Instead, it reflects a hope that disruption will lead to renewal. Historical records show that nations throughout time have faced internal crisis when they refused to address injustice. Civilizations that ignored marginalized communities eventually struggled with instability, corruption, or decline. These patterns mirror spiritual lessons found in many religious texts. When justice is rejected, turmoil rises. When compassion is ignored, division grows. When truth is avoided, confusion spreads. These patterns form the foundation for the belief that Trump symbolized a spiritual reaction to American history. Globally, observers saw the United States face intense division during the Trump presidency. Protests, elections, cultural debates, and social movements created waves of tension. Many nations, with their own histories of inequality, watched closely. They saw the United States wrestling with identity and accountability. Some global voices suggested that a nation claiming moral leadership must first confront its internal contradictions. These interpretations add depth to the idea that divine correction can occur on a national scale. Spiritual interpretations often blend personal experience and collective memory. For many Black Americans, the memory of suffering shapes how political events are understood. They examine events through a long timeline stretching from slavery to the present. They see patterns of resistance, resilience, and renewal. They see how divine strength sustained their ancestors. In this context, the rise of a controversial leader becomes part of the larger story. It becomes a moment that forces the nation to confront its unresolved history. Tony Evans teaches that God works through both comfort and disruption. He teaches that spiritual growth sometimes requires shaking the foundations of comfort. Under this teaching, Trump becomes a symbol of national shaking. His presence forced debates that many preferred to avoid. His rhetoric exposed long-ignored tensions. His leadership created pressure that made racial injustice a central topic. For those who see history through a moral and spiritual lens, this process resembles divine correction. Yet the idea of punishment must be interpreted with caution. Many theologians suggest that divine activity aims not to destroy but to transform. Punishment in this sense means allowing consequences to unfold so that change becomes possible. When applied to the United States, this suggests that the Trump era opened an opportunity for the nation to grow. It challenged Americans to reflect on fairness, compassion, truth, and unity. It pushed conversations about justice beyond the margins and into mainstream attention. The humanitarian perspective adds further depth. Political tension does not only affect leaders, it affects families, workers, immigrants, students, and communities. Economic uncertainty, health crises, and growing division all impact daily life. The belief that divine justice is at work invites people to consider how they can respond with empathy rather than anger. It encourages responsibility rather than blame. It pushes society to seek healing rather than deepen division. The idea that the God of Black Americans punished white America through Trump is not a literal claim for many who express it. It is a symbolic interpretation that speaks to a deeper truth. It captures the idea that a nation cannot escape the moral consequences of its history. It expresses the belief that divine justice eventually brings hidden issues to light. It conveys the awareness that racial inequality remains a wound that must be acknowledged before it can be healed. Throughout the Trump era, many Americans began openly discussing racism in ways that had not happened for decades. Protests called for justice. Movements demanded accountability. Corporations, institutions, and communities reconsidered policies and attitudes. This national awakening did not arise from comfort. It arose from conflict. Under the spiritual interpretation, conflict becomes a catalyst for change. It breaks complacency. It forces people to choose between silence and truth. Tony Evans emphasizes that true change begins with the heart. He teaches that nations change when individuals change. He calls for humility, repentance, unity, and righteousness. These teachings resonate strongly with communities seeking justice. They remind listeners that political leaders do not control spiritual destiny. Instead, they become instruments within a larger divine plan. Under this view, Trump was not a cause but a tool. He represented a moment in history that allowed deeper truths to surface. The global reaction to American turmoil serves as a reminder of how connected the world has become. When a nation experiences moral tension, it affects the entire international landscape. Other nations evaluate their own political and social issues as they watch. They examine the consequences of division. They consider the importance of justice. They reflect on the role of leadership. In this sense, the spiritual implications expand beyond one nation. As we reflect on the belief that divine justice influenced the political direction of the United States, we must consider what the next steps could be. If the Trump era represents exposure, then the next era must focus on healing. Healing requires honesty. It requires listening. It requires empathy. It requires understanding the pain carried by those who suffered under unequal systems. Without these steps, exposure becomes pointless. Transformation requires action. The belief that God uses political disruption to awaken nations calls people to live with intention. It calls communities to confront injustice rather than ignore it. It calls leaders to seek wisdom rather than power. It calls individuals to choose compassion over division. These values appear throughout the teachings of Tony Evans. He urges listeners to embrace righteousness so that society can move toward unity. This vision provides a path forward for Americans of all backgrounds. As the United States continues to navigate political tension, many wonder what lessons the nation will choose to embrace. Will it face its history with courage or avoid it? Will it seek justice or maintain inequality? Will it pursue unity or deepen division? These questions determine the spiritual future of the nation. Political leaders rise and fall, but moral responsibility remains. The belief that divine justice shaped recent events challenges America to choose a higher path. When a nation confronts its deepest wounds, it must also embrace hope. Hope allows communities to believe that healing is possible. Hope gives strength to those who fight for justice. Hope inspires unity. Hope connects generations. This hope is part of the faith tradition carried by Black Americans for centuries. It transforms suffering into determination. It turns pain into purpose. It shapes a vision of a nation redeemed through truth. In conclusion, the belief that the God of Black Americans punished white America through Trump is a symbolic interpretation of a complex historical moment. It speaks to the ongoing struggle for justice. It reflects the desire for accountability. It expresses faith in divine order. It challenges society to reflect on its actions. It invites the nation to seek healing. And it reminds the world that moral truth carries power greater than political authority. Thank you for watching and for thoughtfully engaging with this deep and challenging topic. May this reflection inspire conversations that move us toward understanding unity and justice.